You good?
Yeah, man, I'm well. And you?
I'm good. Are you in? So are you in the boat right now?
It's a bigger boat, as you can see. It's
Yeah, yeah.
a better boat. It's an
This,
upgrade.
yeah, this boat looks nice, man.
It is. It's fresh.
How long you had it for?
Maybe a year or something. This is just a living room, innit? There's two bedrooms as well.
Okay, nice, man. I like to call you the original hippie.
The original hippie. I think there was some before me.
But you just doing it in your new way, you know? It's like breaking the traditions of Oxford University students, you know?
Yeah, that's true. Living on the river, making films about colonialism, all sorts of kind of what's the word? Not disruptive. Yeah, just different. Not going and being a banker.
I hear you. I hear you. I seen some of your music as well recently, man. The one where you're in the
Hmm.
graveyard doing all like the dancing and stuff.
Yeah, cradle to the grave. What do you make of
I like it, man. I like it. Yeah, it's cool.
it? That was just that my friend sent me a beat and he was like, "Oh, throw something on this," and I was like, "Yeah, we'll do." So I wrote something, and then I have a mate called Michael, Nigerian guy, in Oxford. And I was like, "Let's just do a music video for it. Let's find a graveyard and just film it." And so we just went there, rocked up with a camera. It started like we had some apples, some like beer bottles, and we just kind of freestyled. It worked out really well. It worked out really well. But yeah, man, I'm putting out more output now at the moment. But the main thing I'm working on is the film project. But it's good. It's good. It's fresh.
Cool, man. Yeah, so I'm just going trying to stay sane amidst this all. But I just thought a really cool thing would be to start doing a few interviews because I started up a podcast um like back in October now, I want to say. And
Hmm.
I did another one with someone else fairly recently, and it was actually quite interesting um, to hear his perspective on doing like Zoom ones because it's like the interview's different because people are in their like place of comfort, um,
Hmm.
which is just I never even thought of it like that because obviously it's a bit weird doing Zoom calls. It's really interesting actually how that just exploded overnight. Something like Zoom got something like 200 million users.
Yeah, I'm sure that stock price went through the roof, innit?
Yeah,
The
it's
same as
crazy.
Airbnbs went through the floor.
Yeah, and it's like yeah, it's really like, that's another thing, isn't it? It's like which businesses are suddenly like elevated massively by this is a really interesting
Hmm.
thing to explore as well. But yeah, man, I just be really keen to hear what your like what your like take on everything is at the moment, how you think the world has responded, how you think Britain's responded, if you think we're all doomed or if you can see a little bit of a silver lining to all of this. I saw you posted some interesting stuff early on about like the repercussions of this on the third world, which seemed pretty interesting as well, which is something that again doesn't hit the mainstream media as much. So just be interesting to hear
Hmm.
what your kind of thoughts on the whole thing are, man.
Yeah, so I mean, Britain's response has obviously been lacking very deeply. It started off with the whole herd immunity thing, and now it's got one of the highest death rates kind of globally, alongside like the US and stuff. So Britain's response has been terrible under the Tories. Um, in general, it's different. It's kind of almost taken seriously as a global health crisis because it's hit Europe so hard. When the Ebola crisis went through, it was a crisis, but it was confined to Africa, and so people didn't really care, even though it was a massive pandemic. Now that this is mainly attacking Western countries, and there's also the potential, and has started to there are cases developing in I mean, of course, Asia as well, and places like Brazil have been massively hit because of the failings of Bolsonaro. But in terms of like Africa, for example, it's not hitting Africa in the same way that it's hitting the West. And even if it does, for example, South Africa has a high rate of infections, but not as high a rate of deaths within those infections because of the fact that its population is so young. And in Africa, generally, we have very young populations. We have like, I think the average age in Nigeria is like 18 or it's definitely sub 20. And it might be like 15 in Niger. Whereas somewhere like Italy is quite old. and obviously coronavirus affects old people more. And so even though there's that barrier of age there, and the fact that a lot of developing countries have younger populations, which kind of protects them, we also need to remember that they don't have the capacity to actually deal with it in the same way. They don't have the respirating rates. They don't have the masks all the time. Some of them have stockpiled the masks from the Ebola crisis, but they don't have the and they more essentially they don't have the means to self isolate, insofar as if you live in a township in South Africa. I mean, we can already see that within the UK, low income and people of colour communities generally have less access to green space and are in more crowded accommodation. And that's part of the reason that the rates of coronavirus amongst BME communities in the UK is much higher than it is amongst white people, because they are generally living in spaces that are a lot more crowded. But if you take that to somewhere like a township in South Africa, or somewhere like a slum in Nigeria, somewhere like Makoko in Lagos, then it becomes, people are sat on top of each other, right? It becomes completely impossible to self-isolate. And also it becomes a lot harder to say, I'm not going to go out to work and I'm going to follow this and just stay at home, because there's no safety net. We're going to pay 80% of your wages, and 80% of what their wages were in the first place wasn't enough to cover basic nutrition, right? So the developing countries don't have the capacity to deal with it. But I think part of the initial reason that it hit the West more than developing age countries in terms of death rates is the age factor, and then other parts just the complete mismanagement by these Western countries. In general, I see. I mean, it's not the end of the world. Like at the end, it's like in terms of a lot of people might die, but I mean, it's not. It's not a zombie apocalypse, right? I mean, it's something which affects a select group of people, which most people, when they get it, and they either show mild symptoms or they're not sure, they're asymptomatic, right? So it's not like a thing which is going to kill off 99% of humanity. It's not the end of the world, but it is affecting things in very large ways, and might affect the way in which we interact for a long way if it takes a very long time to find a vaccine. If it takes, if every time they loosen the lockdown restrictions and stuff, things start to peak, it could affect things in terms of our behavior and it already is affecting our behavior and the way we're having to interact in positive ways and negative ways. I mean, the fact that all these shops have been closed, people can't go to Pret every day to get their bagel, this at the rest. They're having to actually interact. They're having to be a bit more self-sustaining. They're having to stay at home. The fact that the global aviation industry is taking a hit, as has the car industry, and people are driving and flying less, and it's actually helping the environment in some ways. The fact that people are starting to question the values that we regularly hold up now that they're locked in their houses all the time and Zoom calling and stuff. There are some positive aspects in that, at least in the developed, well, I don't want to use the word developed, but in the Western nations that have a lot of these issues with consumerism and excess and this, that, the rest. People having to be kind of reassess that, but then at the same time, it does mean that in terms of the economy, if the safety nets which have been installed, if things like the UBI, Universal Basic Income, which have been looked at in Spain, the kind of government paying wages schemes that was been looked at in the UK, if all of that falls through and they start pulling back on that and moving towards regular kind of free market policies and stuff, that it could be very, very bad for people in the lower in kind of precarious positions, if any kind of safety net stops and there still isn't any kind of industry of work for them to go back to. So the hope is that it allows us to move towards a society in which all of these unnecessary jobs, all of this, that, the rest, all of these unnecessary industries, all of this kind of excess and over the top consumerism starts to recede, and something else comes in place whereby people are allowed to self-actualize, people are allowed to have things such as a universal basic income, people are allowed to stay at home and do things, be creative, work remotely from home with laptops, this kind of thing. It'll be interesting to see how things change, but I definitely don't think it's an apocalypse and the end of the world. And I also think that the fact that that affects mainly older generations somewhat, very, very somewhat, insulates some developing countries from the extent of the effect that it's had in places like the UK and Italy.
Cool. There's a lot to unpack
That was
in
a bit
that.
rambly. That was a bit rambly.
No, no,
As
no,
I always am. That was just me talking without having a formulated thing. I just talk and go off on tangents all the time.
no worries, no worries. Yeah, no, I thought maybe we could wheel a little bit back to the kind of new studies coming out about how it is affecting BAME people, because I found that quite interesting. You kind of mentioned that it was in relation to people being living in close quarters, and I
Not
suppose
just that as well, though.
there's the
It's also the fact
socio-economic
that,
thing,
yeah,
but
the fact that they're more likely to be in those frontline jobs, right? As
yeah,
well.
yeah, true,
A
true.
BAME person more likely to be a bus driver, more likely to be security guard, more likely to be working in a hospital in kind of a nursing position where they can't just sit back and right. They're more likely to be in frontline jobs. They're less likely to be sat in a conservatory, trading remotely, right?
Yeah, but I thought the studies were trying to suggest anyway that it wasn't to do with those things. They were trying to, it seemed like from what I saw, they were trying to suggest that there's just something, you know, about
Medical.
BME people that are
Well, I mean, I
affected
don't think there's
worse.
any indication. I mean, we know of conditions that medical conditions that overrepresent that are over kind of that affect BME people more. We know sickle cell, for example, is something which affects people of Afro-Caribbean descent. We know that in terms of blood transfusions, people of Afro-Caribbean descent are in a greater need in the UK, and Black people don't donate blood. We know the diseases and vitamin D deficiency. We know the diseases and the that medically in terms of actual in terms of the actual kind of um, genetics of it affects black communities particularly more. Although we could, that's not to say that the NHS or the government does anything about it to kind of actually make sure that there's that specialized care for those communities. And I haven't seen anything yet to indicate that medically um, COVID-19 black people are more susceptible to it. I've seen things which indicate that it's policy and socioeconomic causal factors, but that's not to say that there isn't. It's just to say that I've not come across that. I haven't been looking for that. I've been doing 120 things and just kind of speaking to people about COVID and stuff. I haven't been like running research focus groups, so yeah, maybe stuff that I've missed.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it just seemed a little bit off to me, man, because I was like, firstly, I clicked on a link, the Guardian link that was like, black people more affected by COVID-19, and I click on it, and the first video is a video about someone talking about the BAME response, and it's like, well, firstly, BAME doesn't mean black, do you know what I mean? So that was kind of my initial response of like, well, how are you measuring this? We already know there's so much kind of misinformation and conflicting information about the testing, and it just seems a very strange thing to suddenly commit all this effort into a research of whether BAME people are more affected, and I can't help but just think about the more general kind of fear mongering in the mass media at the moment as well, and how that connects to everything. Because one thing is also worth exploring is, what are your thoughts on the fear, because there's all these positives that could come out of this, like UBI, universal basic income, but the fear of people on the day to day, that's now something that might just be with us for a long time. I mean, you know, people are super scared to walk past you on the street, and all of this stuff. How do you think what the ramifications of this kind of fear are going to be?
Um, I don't know. It depends on who they are. I think that rightly, old people are a bit scared of, and you see them walking out and they're kind of like trying to avoid you on the street and this, that, the rest. I think, I mean, fear is just fear. It's going to be there. It's like people are dying. People are going to be scared of this virus, right? Fear and caution, right? It's in line. People need to be cautious. People need to be cautious. They need to make sure that they're taking the correct measures. And so some element of fear and caution is a good thing. And if that stays and embeds itself into a society, and even after the virus is gone, people have better health habits, they have better this, that, the rest, it's fine. But yeah, I still think that human interaction is important, and people keeping connected is important, and people not kind of just spending all their time huddled away is important, and that especially for younger generations who are trying to like navigate this. I mean, there's a lot of young people who are like, oh, it's just going to affect old people. Let's go out and party, and that is completely irresponsible, right? You shouldn't be off snogging a different person every weekend, um, because snogging is the best way to transmit a virus. Um, but nonetheless, young people still want to kind of have interactions with people, and they feel as though this isn't going to kill me. And if I'm not hanging out with old people, why am I bothering? Or they don't really understand that if you hang out with other young people, and then those are the young people who hang out with transmit someone, and that person hangs out with an old person, then that's the causal element. I think it's going to be about navigating how we kind of continue to socialize, how we continue to do this at the rest, whilst maintaining a level of responsibility. And it'll be a good test on how interconnected, how kind of interdependent society is, and how much people will do things for other people. But I think that for the people who aren't in directly vulnerable groups, i.e., people with respiratory problems or people who are old, the fear at the moment, as far as I can see, is just getting replaced by kind of like an impatience. And I want to get on with life, and I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to see my friends, I want to see my family. And a lot of them are just getting a bit lax about their fear and caution. So keeping the caution up whilst making sure that the fear isn't kind of destabilizing society and stopping people having normal human interactions, I think is a good middle ground.
Do you trust all the information out there about the virus at the moment?
No, of course not. I don't trust any kind of mainstream this, that, the rest. And what information is there? Donald Trump saying China this, China that, China to do, like the Daily Express saying that we need to send a bill there. Like, of course not. If you look at the history of global medicine, we've got all sorts of dodgy stuff. We've got the Tuskegee syphilis experiment in the US. I mean, I did a TED talk at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine about the links between colonialism and global health, which you can find if you go on YouTube and type in the interconnections of global health, which goes into a lot of depth about all the dodgy stuff in international health in terms of large pharmaceutical companies, who gets to make vaccines, who gets to profit from vaccines, placebo-based evidence trials. So no, when you're talking about global health and you're talking about vaccines, you're talking about potentially huge profit from who gets to make and distribute a vaccine. You're talking about large industries which are being disrupted, like the airline industry at the moment, by the fact that people aren't consuming and traveling as they usually do. There's always going to be a load of stakeholders, and a lot of the stakeholders aren't going to have everyone's best interest at heart. And a lot of the stakeholders are going to have links to the media. So you can't trust everything you read. Of course not.
And what are your thoughts on you kind of briefly touched on the universal basic income thing, and I think that's quite an interesting thing at the moment. Do you think that the following in some ways is like the preliminary stages of a universal basic income?
Yeah, I think the furlough, in a way, was the UK government trying to avoid having to actually do UBI, because they're saying, oh, it's temporary, the rest of it. And if they call it UBI, for example, Spain called it UBI and then has now said that maybe after this thing we'll continue with UBI, right? Whereas universal basic income is completely universal. The UK government wasn't universal. It wasn't everyone gets this amount of money. It was people who are working and are not, originally it was people who are working and are not freelancers will get this percentage of their salary up to a certain thing. So it was still within the kind of, oh, we're just helping the companies not lose their employees, being able to pay their employees so as to keep business running. It wasn't in terms of people deserve to have a basic level of sustenance in life. And that should be provided for by a state. And then anything above that, they can then work for extra. So I think the way the government did it, it was them trying to put something in place to avoid having to go further. But it will be interesting to see if now Boris has said, oh, people can go back to work. Some people, it'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of the ideas behind UBI. And if they again manage to kind of make a forefront. Because someone like Spain, I think it was, I can't remember, I think the government was saying, we're going to put UBI in and it might stay in place even after coronavirus. But in the UK, it was never like that. This is a temporary measure to help companies float by being able to not have to fire their employees.
Mm.
But still, it was surprising to see that level of kind of overnight 80% of things will be paid for by the government salaries from the Tory government. It was surprising to see that.
Yeah, man, and 100% now they've just kind of announced that there's 4 months of it coming as well. I don't know where they're pulling out this money from,
Yeah,
but
they're borrowing it, aren't they? Debt.
yeah. Do you think, in a more wider sense, based on the statistics, that the lockdown was the best action to take? You mentioned the fear, and you mentioned how it's fear is sometimes necessary, etc., etc. But if this goes and collapses the economy, which it seems to have done, and the economic ramifications could be profoundly worse than the virus itself, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on that a bit before as well. Insofar as it could lead to a recession, it could lead to this, and it depends on how the government, how it's dealt with in terms of distribution of wealth. Generally, it depends on how if something comes in place whereby, like UBI, this and the rest, whereby people can we can because we've always needed to peel back the amount of work. I mean, there's so many pointless jobs, and people are working like 5 days a week, long days, doing a lot of pointless stuff, which is not necessary, because in the West world, they still have this idea of the Protestant work ethic, which is like one must work, you must work, and you must be working this much, and you must do this and the rest in order to have value in life, rather than things should be to live, and work should just be there to in order to do the things which are necessary for people to live as a community and a society. And I think that if there can be some kind of paradigm shift delivered through this, where people realize that that isn't necessarily the case, then it's possible for a better society to come out, and for us to realize that for the good of that kind of a recession of sorts is only there because of the fact that we have a society which is structured such that without work, and a lot of that work being pointless, or a lot of that work being someone working in a prep so that people don't have to make their own sandwiches at home, right? um, People can't get salaries and therefore can't live and be on the home on the street, begging, right? That's the general mentality. Oh well, must. Whereas if there can be a paradigm shift where we see that isn't necessarily necessary, then something good could come. If there isn't a paradigm shift, and it's just loads, we still have this idea of no, we still have society as it's structured now, but no jobs. And you see that all the time. It's like, oh, we're creating jobs. Like, what do you mean we're creating jobs? Why aren't you just creating? Why aren't you just feeding people? Why is it not we're feeding people? We're creating jobs. We need to build this huge polluting factory because it's creating jobs. It's like, well, those people, you could just give them the money and then they'd be able to eat. And you could find a way of having them do something actually useful and the rest. So I think I'm rambling a lot, but I think if there can be a paradigm shift away from the idea that work is the be all and end all of life and must be done most of the time, and if you don't work in a certain way, then you can't get a salary and therefore you can't live, then there could be a better thing. If there isn't, then yeah, it could lead to a huge economic recession, and it probably will, because I don't see this paradigm shift happening overnight, although it does seem to be happening a little bit with the whole corona thing. Then yeah, there can be huge economic ramifications, especially for the poorest in society, and especially for, and as we know from the 2008 crisis, as we know from Wall Street crash of the early 20th century, as we know from a number of historic events, when there's a large crash in a recession or depression in the developed world, it kicks itself back to developing countries as well, which has a knock-on effect.
What hope have you seen so far of a paradigm shift?
Just the fact that people are seeing, right? People are there like, oh, I don't have to go to an office every day. I'm doing this job from home on my own time, remotely, and I'm still getting my work done, right? People who work with computers or call centers or those kind, people are seeing that work can be more flexible and can be remote. I mean, the Twitter CEO yesterday announced that, I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before, announced that Twitter employees, even after coronavirus has ended, don't have to go back to an office for as long as they want. They can work from home. So that's one step in the right direction, right? People being able to work from home if they're not required to go in and have a physical presence, if it's an office thing rather than a service job, is one step towards people being able to work on their own terms, in their own house, with their kids around them, not between set hours, a bit more flexibly, a bit more remotely, conversations over things like Zoom, right? And that's one indication. And then the other indication is people are going out. Like people, I think in some areas people are kind of going outside more and just enjoying walks and jogging more than they were before, because they can't go to the cinema, they can't go to this, but they need to escape the house. So people are enjoying nature a bit more. People aren't driving about as much because of the whole thing. So I mean, there are indications. There are little indications that these kind of things are happening. But in no way has it happened. In no way is it predestined to happen. It has to be made to happen.
Mm. And so, by and large, you're in favor of universal basic income.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Cool. What's the craziest conspiracy theory you've heard about the coronavirus?
5G was a bit weird. That it's like been sent out by 5G. Because I was there chatting with someone over Zoom and they were coughing. I was like, "You're not on 5G, are you? Because I don't want to catch this thing over the waves."
Yeah.
That was a bit mad. The 5G thing, and then what else? There's loads of them, isn't there? There's loads of them. What was it that Eddie Izzard was saying? I've forgotten. Yeah, and the thing is though, some of them have. I don't want to get into it too much because I don't want to get into it without researching it. But I'm sure some of these conspiracy theories have a kernel of truth to them. Not the 5G thing, but other ones. So I'm not going to incriminate myself by talking about them until I've done the reading, so I know which ones I trust. But I've heard a few that I've been like, and a few that I've been like, okay.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, yeah, no, I thought obviously the 5G one's a big one, but I also think that it was probably, I think a lot of stuff got lost in translation. And what's really interesting is that prior to this whole pandemic, there was already red flags about the health repercussions of 5G. But despite that, because I don't have the research like you, I think with that conversation, I think it's really interesting to just interrogate the fact that our continual advancement of technology is not democratic, and things are just implemented kind of without our say so in the name of innovation. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm quite happy with 4G. I don't know why suddenly we need to be investing.
I'm having this Zoom call on 4G and we've not had much lagging yet.
You were lagging a bit at the start, mate.
If I was on 5G.
There you go, man. But unfortunately, another thing that I've seen is there has been a little bit of censorship of some videos and doctors and voices who seem to be going against the kind of mainstream narrative. And that's not to say
the craziest thing I saw, actually, it wasn't even a conspiracy. The craziest thing I saw was that French doctor saying that we should trial this thing in Africa. It's been like, oh, like they did did you not see that? There was some French doctor who was like, and we saw before that they used some prostitutes to trial some other disease. And so I think a good place would be Africa, in fact, to do a trial because, and he just gave this reason why we should try it in Africa. And it blew up because everyone was just like, who's this racist French doctor chatting nonsense? And the other one was like, yeah, I actually agree. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
How do you feel about, because obviously, a lot of Bill Gates' vaccines are trialed in Africa and whatnot. That stuff's
Bill
a bit
Gates
scary.
is a bit of a dodgy guy.
Mm.
Wait, what was that? It's someone else. Cool. Yeah, Bill Gates. There's a book called what's it called? It's called I think No Such Thing as a Free Gift. Can you let me just Google. Can you just go? Are you on your own laptop? Google No Such Thing as a Free Gift book and see if a book comes up about Bill Gates.
No such thing as a free gift. Tell me about the book. Yeah, I found it.
Yep.
Let me read out. Right? I'll read out the description. The charitable sector is one of the fastest growing industries in the global economy. Nearly half of the more than 85,000 private foundations in the United States have come into being since the year 2000. Just under 5,000 more were established in 2011 alone. This deluge of philanthropy has helped create a world where billionaires wield more power over education policy, global agriculture, and global health than ever before. In No Such Thing as a Free Gift, author and academic Lindsay McGowie puts this new golden age of philanthropy under the microscope, paying particular attention to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as large charitable organizations replace governments as the providers of social welfare. Their largesse becomes suspect. The businesses fronting the money often create the very economic instability and inequality the foundations are purported to solve. We are entering an age when the ideals of social justice are dependent on the strained rectitude and questionable generosity of the mega rich. Ooh.
And it talks a lot, the whole second section of that book is about Bill Gates and the kind of undue influence he has over the World Health Organization, because he's one of the biggest donors and therefore one of the biggest. But I mean, the amount of influence he has, if you compare him to some of the country donors who donate a lot more money than him in total terms, he has a huge amount of influence over the World Health Organization, its policy, and especially in terms of patent law, which he traditionally backed patent law because of his desire to hold a monopoly over the kind of computer software industry, because patent law was what was allowing him and Windows to basically have a monopoly until Apple came along as like the main competitor. Over like in every school, people use Windows 97, Windows 98, right? And therefore, it was a monopolized market for a very long time. And so he's always been a big backer of patent laws, but these are the same patent laws which allow large pharmaceutical companies to prevent third world countries from accessing generic healthcare medicines. So, for example, when the HIV pandemic was going on in South Africa, large pharmaceutical companies would sue India, which was creating generics, and then South Africans were buying those generics in order to be able to cure HIV. And they'd say, no, you have to buy the drug from the company itself. Not necessarily the company that did the research. Often it was academic institutions, universities that did the research, but the company would buy up the rights, buy up the medicine, and then yeah. So these patent laws basically protected large pharmaceutical companies, and meant a lot of people couldn't afford medicine for things like AIDS, HIV, etc. And so Bill Gates, despite being touted as kind of the leader of global health and donating large amounts of money through his foundation, money which was made, as I say, through this kind of monopoly on the computer software industry, I think he has far too much say in what goes on in global health, and I think often his opinions are controversial. He's done some good things, but he needs to be approached with a great deal of caution. And I'd suggest everyone read that book, No Such Thing as a Free Gift. The first half of the book is about the kind of philanthrocapital industry in general, and the second half is about Bill Gates more specifically.
So are you worried about him providing the vaccine?
I mean, I don't know. I've not done enough research, but I know that I have a friend, Tet, who's always posting about Bill Gates and saying, "Oh, the Messiah, this, the Messiah of global health is going to do." He's definitely worried about Bill Gates, and I would definitely say I would say, as I always do when I've not done enough reading into something, I've not done enough reading at the moment into the particulars of Bill Gates and coronavirus. But I would say that from my knowledge of Bill Gates' history, I would always approach with a element of caution. I don't like to speak about things I haven't researched yet, and I've been working heavily on my film, so I haven't had enough time to delve in as much as I would into everything. But yeah, I'd say you should be approached with caution.
Mm. And do you think the end point is a vaccine? Because it's really interesting, because it's like, obviously they're doing all this like mass testing, but you know, the big flaw in testing is that once you're tested, you can contract it after you've been tested. So you do wonder, is a level of actual normality back to how we were before this pandemic reliant on something like a vaccine?
I mean, vaccine is ideal. Vaccine is what they had with smallpox. Vaccine is the polio vaccine. Vaccine is ideal because vaccine means that it's preventative. I've not had it, and I've got a vaccine, and now I'm not going to get it. But a vaccine could take any number of time. I mean, we don't know when a vaccine is going to be available, and we need something in the meantime. So, which is why they're talking about like tracing things. They're talking about specific self-isolated moments of targeted tracking, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, I think that the end point is they have to try and develop a vaccine.
Does the tracking worry you at all?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a reason. I won't say an excuse, but it's a reason that they will give in order to the surveillance. So that's always going to be a worry because I mean they already kind of know where you are, what you're doing, who you are with, what you're talking about, and now they can know. They can also know. 1 second. They can also know. They can also know what your heart rate is. Give me 2 seconds. I just got an email from my director saying text from my director saying send urgent email. So I just need to see
That's
how
all right.
urgent
I
it
mean,
is.
we can wrap this up, man. We've been talking plenty.
Like 45 minutes. Let me just read the email.
Cool.
Okay, it's not that urgent. I mean, it is urgent, but it's not. It's urgent for him because he's worried all the time. Cool. Yeah, I mean, it can be done in 10 minutes.
This is why you gotta use a laptop, bro. But yeah.
Indeed.
So yeah, is there anything in your life, maybe before we finish, that you think that you're going to change due to this pandemic?
I won't be winding not in Hill Carnival this year. I won't be winding. No winding, man. Nah, in fact, don't include that in the final cut. What is that? There is
Why not?
That was a joke. Yeah, you could include it.
All right.
Include me saying it was a joke as well.
Thank you. Sir. There's no nothing. There's no carnival. There's no Glastonbury. There's no nothing.
Of course. No, I mean in my life it's just meant that I'm spending a lot of time on the river. I mean, look, no, this isn't a bad place to isolate.
You're a pirate.
Can you see it?
Yeah, man. You're a pirate, bro.
It's the one, man. But yeah, for me, I'm spending a lot of time working on from my boat remotely, and it's kind of teaching me actually that this is a model that I could follow. Because of course, when I do a film, I want to be going out and doing this at the rest. But in terms of me and I'm learning languages, right? And now I'm having a Zoom call with you. But my French is now at a level where I could be having a Zoom call with some guy in France. And one of the things I was thinking of was how I can use these language skills I'm building to start to forge these connections and start to kind of forge these into everything. And I was thinking, am I going to travel there? I just realized that as long as I can reach out online, as long as I've got the skills down, I could be sat on my boat having Zoom calls in Spanish and French and Portuguese, people in Brazil. It could be at night time because of the time difference, right? I'm nocturnal anyway. So I'm thinking that for me, maybe, yeah. I'm thinking of ways in which I can work from the boat, work from the river, in a more global way, is a more global network. And this experience is helping me kind of imagine what that might look like.
Cool, man. I'm learning French as well on Duolingo. I'm on day 53, so I'm quite proud of myself.
Duolingo's not the way to do it, man. Have I told you my technique?
No.
I use the world's most translated books, and I just listen to them until I know them by heart, basically, and then listen to them in various languages, and it just drills itself in.
Really?
I use Bible, which even though I'm not religious, I use the Bible, and I use Harry Potter. I have Harry Potter in Hindi, in Spanish, in French, in Portuguese, in Arabic, in Turkish, all the audio recordings.
Does that work?
And then also Game of Thrones. It works really well.
So
I'll show you when you're next in Oxford. I'll show you.
So you listen.
I can even send you the links over Facebook. Yeah, man.
And what you can figure out what they're saying.
Exactly, because I already know the context.
Right.
I've already listened to it in English and then French and then Spanish loads of times. So when I start listening to it in a language like Portuguese, which is quite similar to Spanish, I can pick up all the different words and stuff, and I already know all the context. It
Cool.
works really well.
You are a special human, though.
I think it's a good technique. I think it's a good technique as well.
I'm pretty sure you're already like an AI robot or something. You can just download information into your brain.
I'm not sure about that.
Cool,
But I
man.
mean, I am actually, yeah, I'm a cyborg, innit? I tried to do the natural reader thing years ago.
Yeah. You listen to stuff at like 3 times the speed, 4 times the speed. It's crazy.
It works.
But yeah, man, we're all cyborgs now with our phones and stuff anyway. So I
Exactly.
saw Elon Musk on Joe Rogan talking about Neuralink the other
This
day.
kid's name. Okay, what nonsense is that? It's just like it's just for me that was just like a celebrity being like they're talking about Corona, they're not talking about me. Let me name my kid some weird collection of numbers and letters so I get some publicity for a few days. That's
Yeah,
the only explanation I can have for why he called his kid that.
it's kind of cool though. Like, why not break the boundaries of what a kid can be called? You know?
Yeah, but call it like Ubuntu or something, or something cool, or or just be like a bit rogue, or be like we'll call it like XR12. I think there was an exclamation mark or something. It's like, what is it? For me, it felt like a publicity stunt.
Yeah. I mean, he's a publicity guy, any old
Yeah,
Elon. But yeah, man, this was fun. Thank you very much. We're gonna have to do this again very soon, I
yeah.
think.
Well, are you gonna put it on, publish it on like Facebook, or where are you gonna pop it?
Yeah,
Because I'd like to
I'll put
share
it
it.
up everywhere. I'll put it up.
Cool, man.
I'm doing
Bless.
loads, man. I've got a lot scheduled in, so we can compare conspiracy notes in each video
Indeed.
and piece together what the real conspiracy is. You know.
Sounds like a plan, man. Sounds like a plan.
All right,
Blessed.
nice one, brother. Take it easy, yeah. Bless
Take it
up.
easy.
Peace.